guys, welcome to the first episode of our Embraced by Douglas Scott podcast. My name's Gabby and I'm here today with our special guest Jack Davis from Bound Creative. We're going to be talking about the key points of diversity, equity and inclusion. So I think a key place to start is just to find out sort of why you're so passionate about diversity and inclusion, Jack.
Yeah, so when I was 16, I came out as a gay man. And this kind of thing is quite hard. I know it took quite a big impact on me. And when I went to part-time jobs, so I worked in just a local takeaway, there was always that, you hear those whispers that people say, is Jack gay? Or, you know, when's he going to come out? And it just got me really agitated because it was almost as if that they saw me as a sexual orientation first instead of as a human. And I kind of got really agitated, but I didn't say anything about it. I just was like, okay, that's fine. I'll just go along with it. And it was only when I went to uni and I found other people like me, so people within the LGBTQ plus community, and we got to share our stories together. That's kind of when I first found the community as a whole.
Yeah, definitely. And what do you think it was about that community that you found at university that led you on to become so passionate about diversity and inclusion now, and why you wanted to carry it on post-graduation?
I think it's the stories that I heard. Everybody came from different backgrounds, different walks of life, and there were people who were struggling with their gender, struggling with their sexual orientation, and it was just really refreshing for me that I was not on my own, and there were still parts in the system that I felt as if that were wrong. So, for instance, like people don't respect pronouns, and just like non-binary isn't legally recognised as a gender, and it just got me really like upset and mad. So when there was like protests about like LGBT rights, specifically trans rights, I really wanted to get involved. And when I started seeing also things on Twitter, because that's where a lot of these kind of comments and like a lot of transphobia happens. Yeah. As someone that's in the community, it just made me feel really bad and made me feel really like sad, really. So I wanted to put that forward and speak more about it.
Yeah, definitely. And do you think it was important to be able to educate people on sort of the respectful way to go about conversations? And so what would you say the key educational points were?
So when I was in school, I start by saying that I was never taught anything about being gay or being trans or like non-binary. So everything that I had to do was in my own research. And so that was kind of a struggle when I went to uni, and that was to adapt. So all that I learned was from my own research and from other people. So the biggest takeaway I think got from that is your identity, and everyone has their own identity. So for instance, like with pronouns, and people don't think pronouns is important, where I say it is really important, because if you use the wrong pronouns against someone, it's almost as if they're told they don't deserve respect. So what I wanted to do was take everything that I'd learned from uni and my past experiences and put it into a workshop. So at Bound, so we deliver workshops and training, and I wrote a workshop for them called Let's Talk Gender, Sexual Orientation and Pronouns.
And I know sort of from my point of view as well, when wanting to sort of really invest my time in learning more about diversity, equity and inclusion, one of the fears that I had was about sort of getting things wrong or not saying things in the right way. Would you say I'm right in the fact that it's more important about the thought behind it than necessarily getting it right straight away? Like, you can be educated on that, and to come to someone and ask for that education is more important than being sort of concerned about how that comes out.
Yeah, and you know that's really important from what you're saying as well, is that you want to learn, or you want, because it's one of those things where people do get a bit worried about, oh, what, am I going to say the wrong thing? And that's something that I do tackle in my workshop. So it is an open space, and this is something that I like to do a lot with, and that they can come to like a session and they can ask questions without fear, and sometimes it takes getting to the difficult questions to get to the answer, and then we'll look at that question and then we'll evaluate it. And no one's asking anyone to be like an expert or a professor on this subject. As if you're willing to learn and willing to be respectful, then that speaks a lot of volumes, really.
Definitely. And would you say there's any key points or key focal areas for people who are starting to investigate and learn more about diversity and inclusion that they should be aware of, or anything that you want to make sure that they know when going into that journey?
Yeah, so if someone came to my workshop, so I would say the first thing that you can learn is that respect. It's that respect element of it, and one of the biggest thing is asking for pronouns. So there's nothing wrong with asking. So if you're ever unsure or you're not 100% certain, it's always best to ask. And sometimes we make the mistake that we misgender someone and we use the wrong pronouns, and you think it's the worst thing to happen, which it isn't. You know, we're all human, we all make mistakes. And as long as you acknowledge it and say, oh, I'm really sorry, no, I didn't mean to do that, instead of ignoring it, then you're almost respecting them and their identity, that you're aware that you made a mistake.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest thing that I want people to take away from like a workshop or anything in general, is it is okay to make a mistake, as long as, I think, if you address it, I think that's what's most important.
Definitely, and I think that translates a lot into the workplace as well. So if when people are approaching these topics, it's important to not assume, like you say, and show people the respect of asking the question. And I think especially in a workplace, it can be difficult to understand the right way to go about that. What would you say are the key things to be aware of in the workplace, and sort of maybe things that sometimes do get overlooked?
I think there's one big thing, I think, and that is mental health. I think people get worried to open up to their employers, and I think that is the biggest barrier. I think a lot of people struggle it, and there was a Stonewall survey that people who were trans or non-binary were much more likely to experience mental health than anybody else, and it was something that I really want to highlight in the workplace, is that having that open conversation with the employer and the employees, and I think that's really important. Definitely.
I think mental health is one of those things that can, obviously, as we're all aware, be very difficult to diagnose and very difficult to spot. And I think one of the difficult things about that is that there's no physical symptoms as such, which sometimes does make people feel less confident about coming forward and talking to their employers about sort of situations that they may need to discuss. What would you say your views are on diversity schemes and things like that within the workplace? And is there anything that you think needs to be sort of set across the board, anything that needs to be brought in or that employers can do to support that more open conversation?
Yeah, I think it's more looking at like your skill set first instead of like someone's like identity. I think in terms of employment, your identity is important in terms of it's who you are, and an employer can sit down with you and understand you. But in notice, so there might be like blind applications, I think, or
blind recruitment.
Blind recruitment. I think that's really, really effective and really important, because it's almost as if you're not. Because I think what people do sometimes is maybe stereotype in a certain way without thinking, and so if someone's gender was a man and they weren't with their masculine traits, they maybe wouldn't know how to react to that, because they might have envisioned someone to be a certain way. And I think with the blind application process underway, I think that would limit that, and I think it would be more open to somebody for what they can offer to a company instead of who they are.
Do you have any concerns about blind recruitment in it maybe reducing talent pools, or potentially stopping us from being as diverse in who we recruit, because you can't make sure that you are reaching minority groups? Or do you think the overall theme of blind recruitment is sort of the way forward?
I think it depends on what role that you're going for, or what industry you're going into. I think there are certain things where maybe if you were doing like a production company, they might be looking for somebody with who's like an ethnic background. But I think in terms of if it was just in general jobs, in terms of, I don't think that if it was for like retail, I think a lot of people do have that skill capacity to do that job, and I think it must be more down to the people that want it the most and people that really want to show that dedication. Whereas I think it's for other roles that they can that they can put more of an open call out to.
Definitely. I think within recruitment, obviously, there's been a study that shows that if men have 60% of this sort of required skill set to apply for a role, they will apply, whereas women will require 100% in order to feel confident enough to apply for a specific role.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think there's a way that we can, of course, in an even more inclusive culture, support people in feeling like they are good enough to apply, should they not have all the skill set needed?
Yeah, that is definitely a problem in itself. That, like, I think that those statistics say right there that women need to prove themselves a lot more than men, and that is definitely something that should not be in place, and that employers should not, or any recruiters should look at that and judge people based on how they identify. And I think that is a massive problem, and I think it's more down.
Well, it's more the fact that they feel like they need those traits, not from an employer's perspective, but more that people applying for the role will look, and women, if they don't reach 100% of the skill set, then they won't apply initially.
Yeah.
And it's whether we can find a way of reaching people.
I think it's those expectations. I think it's when certain people are expected to be a certain way, whereas others aren't. I think that definitely says a lot as a whole, and how the whole system, and it needs to be evaluated again, and needs to have a more look into in a way.
And how we can kind of be more inclusive in, say, the way that we write job applications, or how we target more minority groups in order to make them feel included in the process. Yeah,
definitely. And it's well with like recruitment, it's more making that opportunities more open for everybody. That's why with like any kind of like blind applications, it restricts that. It doesn't pinpoint just one person. It's more, it creates an inclusive environment, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And what would you say your thoughts are on sort of equity versus equality then within sort of a workplace? Obviously with equity, it's more about making sure that everybody has the right support that they need as an individual, as opposed to across the board it being equal for all. What are your sort of thoughts on that?
Yeah, so with equity, this also speaks a lot of volumes to me because I have autism and I struggle with different things. So I have like sensory issues to do with sound. So like with cars passing, or like loud noises, like if someone was cleaning like the Hoover, it really does make me it makes me feel distracted.
Yeah.
So I think that is important because the employers can assess those needs. So for me personally, they would avoid working in a loud noise like area, or if there was going to be works or anything like drilling happening, I would be allowed to work from home. So it definitely puts in place because it's for my requirements and for me personally. So I think that it is really important.
And how confident did you feel having that conversation with an employer and saying, these are the things that I need in order to be able to succeed at my job?
It was refreshing because I never got that in any other job that I worked in. I think I more got this from any other previous employer. I think they assessed my needs and who I was as a person. So when I got the job, so when I started working there, it was based off my skills alone and what I can bring to the company. And then when I was there, I was allowed to tell them about my autism and about some of my sensory issues. It really allowed me it built my relationship stronger with my employer as well, I think. Yeah.
And what do you think it was about them that made you feel so comfortable in having that conversation? Just for sort of other employers to maybe take note as to ways that they can implement that comfort within the workplace?
I think it showed, back to where we were before, that kind of respect. It's their understanding me as a person. They are aware that I struggle with sensory and that they took it as a priority. They didn't say, okay, we'll sort it out later. It was, no, your well-being is a high priority for us. And I think that's what a lot of employers should, even if it was like one-to-ones, like every so often to note down if there was any problems, or if I was feeling in any type of way. I think it builds a stronger relationship as well between the employer and the employee. Yeah,
definitely. I 100% agree. Look, is there anything that you sort of want to touch on today that we haven't spoken about as of yet?
No, I think I've really enjoyed what we've covered.
Yeah.
And maybe the last thing maybe is just I really am very passionate about speaking up for trans rights, especially.
Yeah.
There's Trans Awareness Week coming up, which I think is really important, and the trans community is kind of under attack right now by radical feminists who believe that trans people do not exist, and I like to remind that to people that your lives do matter, and that the importance of pronouns and how we can all stop this hate and live in a
more
an accepting society. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. Well, look, thank you very much for coming on today. It's been great to talk to you.
Oh, thank you. No, it's been great.
Yeah, definitely an enlightening conversation.